There'll be bluebirds over the white cliffs of Dover.
In the dark depths of the Second World War, one singer's voice rang out more memorably than anyone else's. It belonged to Vera Lynn.
The shepherd will tend his sheep, the valley will bloom again, and Jimmy will go to sleep.
If it had been left up to her, a remarkable career that spanned 8 decades might never have happened at all.
If I had my way, I wouldn't have done any of this singing. I was sort of pushed into it, really, by my mum. I remember on one occasion driving to the venue, if we want to call it, in a bus and hoping it would break down so I wouldn't have to get there and sing.
Yours till the stars lose their glory.
Her distinctive voice earned her a place in everyone's hearts as the most memorable Forces sweetheart.
Yours to the end of life's story, this pledge to you.
A collection of Vera Lynn's greatest hits was released last year, and she and her daughter Virginia are here in the south of France waiting for important news.
Hello?
Hello, Dame Vera.
Yes.
It's Mark Wilkinson here from Decca Records. You are now officially #1 in the UK album charts. Congratulations.
Oh, boy, thank you. #1.
Aged 92, Dame Vera is the oldest artist to reach #1 in the UK album chart, outselling any of the remastered Beatles back catalogue. Her songs are now part of our heritage. And her role in the Second World War is even taught in schools as part of the national curriculum. I met Dame Vera Lynn at her home in Sussex to hear her extraordinary life story. You were actually singing for an audience at the age of 2, weren't you?
Well, no. Well, among the family, yes. My uncle, who was a semi-professional comic, used to come home from the club that they were at and get me out of bed to sing to them when I was about 2.5.
Vera Lynn was born Vera Welsh in London's East Ham in 1917. The East Ham Working Men's Club was at the heart of her family life, and at weekends, her father even compared the popular variety shows.
Well, you know, if you were clubby people, as our family was, it was a way of life, really. Every weekend was in the club.
We used to go to the fish and chip shop on the way.
Yeah.
You used to have chips and I used to have the crackling. Do you remember?
He's my older brother.
Well, she's only my kid sister, and you're only 92, aren't you?
Yeah.
I'm 95, I shall be 96 on the 4th of March.
He was a very nice dancer, my brother,
Yeah.
weren't you?
Well, yes.
Took after Dad.
I don't like saying so, but you're right.
Money was always tight, and Vera's father was in and out of work throughout the 20s, sometimes at the docks, or as a plumber's mate, or even as a glassblower. Your voice is actually slightly more posh or whatever, just slightly. Isn't it?
Yes, well, I try to, because coming from the East End part of the world, and having a real Cockney dad, although my mother spoke very nicely.
Oh, did she? Yeah.
Oh, yes. She had a different schooling than my father.
And when did you start first times sing with an audience?
Oh, when I was 7.
When you were 7, yeah.
And that was at a Dagenham Working Men's Club. And I had a little cream dress, white dress with little mauve ribbons threaded through it.
Oh.
Made by my mum. She used to make all my clothes. She was a court dressmaker when she was a girl.
Vera's mother, Annie, realised that her daughter's talent could help the family finances.
I used to get 7 and 6pence for singing 3 songs, and if I got an encore, I got an extra 1 and 6, which paid for our fares.
Was it rather daunting and sort of slightly terrifying, or by now did you love singing?
If I had my way, I wouldn't have done any of this singing in the clubs, because I was very nervous, and I really wasn't enjoying it. But Mum organised it, and so I did as Mum told me.
Up the wooden hill to Bedfordshire, heading for the land of dreams. When I look back to those happy times.
Throughout her school years, Vera travelled by bus and tram all over East London and the outer suburbs to fulfil her singing engagements.
I did all the clubs everywhere. Where there was a working men's club, you bet I sang in it.
To keep Vera in songs, she and her mother would often make the journey up west to London's Tin Pan Alley.
Because I never sang in the original keys that the songs were printed in. I always had to have them changed down into a lower key.
Yeah.
That cost either 6pence if you just had the right hand written in, and 1 and 6pence if you had the bass.
By now, Vera was a seasoned solo singer, but variety acts were all the rage. So in 1928, aged 11, she joined a juvenile troupe. What was the Madame Harris's
Cracker Cabaret Kids?
Yeah.
She was a lady, and she ran a little dancing class, and her daughter used to take the classes over. And we used to hire the Salvation Army hut on a Saturday morning, and we'd all go in there and pay our 6pences for a lesson.
It was at this point that Vera decided that Welsh wasn't glamorous enough for a stage name, and after a family conference, she took her grandmother's maiden name to become Vera Lynn. In your whole youth and childhood, it was work, work, work a lot of the time, wasn't it? Do you feel that because you were doing all of that, you missed out a bit on a carefree childhood?
Well, I felt that I wasn't that free as a lot of other children were. You know, they'd go off and have parties at weekends and go out for the day with their parents. But first and foremost was in my mind was that, I've got a concert to do on Sunday or a cabaret on Saturday. And I was always careful that I kept my voice in. As young as I was, I looked after myself.
Vera's show business career wasn't without other consequences.
I wasn't an academically very clever girl. I used to get some very low marks. Apart from drawing and handwork and sewing, anything to do with my hands. But academically, no.
Vera left school at 14. She wasn't sure what to do next and didn't yet see singing as a full-time career.
I thought I'd go and find myself a job. So I went to the local labour exchange and signed on. And I said sewing was something I'd like to do. Anyway, I went, and I was never so miserable in all my life. All I was doing was sewing on buttons, which didn't interest me. I wanted to make garments. So I got home that night, and my daddy said, "What was it like?" So I burst into tears and said it was horrible. I wasn't allowed to talk, and we couldn't sing among ourselves, and all I did was sew on buttons. He said, "Well, how much are you getting for this?" So I said, 6 and 6pence a week. So he said, "Well, you've earned 1 shilling and a penny today." I said, "Yes." He said, "Right, that's your last day at work. Give it up and just carry on with your singing," which I did.
A few days later, Vera received a postal order for 1 shilling and 1 penny. It was the only day's paid work outside show business that she was ever to do.
The nightclubs were booming in the 30s. London was tapping its toes to the gay tunes of Tin Pan Alley.
Popular music was by now a thriving industry, with gramophone records, radio broadcasts, and increasingly ambitious live performances. The reigning kings were the individual band leaders, each of whom would pick and choose from a selection of favoured singers.
This was the era of the dance band, and vocalists, however good they were, very rarely were given any recognition on record labels, for example. It was the band that people went to see, so Jack Hilton, Ambrose, they were the big names.
When sorrow comes to stay and all the world is grey, just starting right away, fading rainbow.
Vera's next step was to find a band leader to hire her.
And just redecorate.
Her chance came one evening when she was performing at a well-known East End venue, Poplar Baths. Howard Baker, one of the East End's biggest band leaders, came to hear her sing. That was about the time when the microphone came in, didn't it? It's amazing the thought you were in these big working men's clubs earlier.
No microphones.
And no microphone, amazing.
No. And they told me that they could hear me singing in the street. Well, you used a different power. But when the microphones came in, if you sang the same way, you blasted everywhere. So I had to have my songs transposed down a key,
right,
so I could sing in a softer way.
Oh, so they came down still lower?
So even lower, so I didn't have to belt so much to be heard at the back of the hall.
Howard Baker kept Vera employed most nights, paying her 10 shillings for each appearance, and recorded her voice for the first time on a demo record that was never released commercially.
It's home where the heavens are brighter, and there's a welcome on every smiling face. It's home where your cares are made light.
When you hear your own voice for the first time, it just didn't sound like me. Horrible.
It's the soul in the soul of every wanderer. Be there, it's a prayer.
But you couldn't read music at the time, and
I couldn't. No, I've never read music. No. I just watched the notes. When they went up, I'd go up, and when they went down, I'd go down. It was instinct more than anything, you know.
In 1934, Vera got a phone call. It was from famous band leader Billy Cotton, inviting her on tour. The partnership didn't last long. After less than 2 weeks on the road, Vera was fired. Her mother later told the press that Billy Cotton had said it was because you're not up to the standards of my band. How did Billy Cotton dare to send you home?
Well, I think he took fright, really, having a young girl, because I was only about 15, 16, travelling around the country with a band of musicians. Then when I started getting very popular, you know, he said that was the worst day's work that he did.
So it was back to Howard Baker and the East End. If Vera was too young to be away from home touring the country, there was another way that she could reach a wider audience. Radio, up until now a luxury, was becoming increasingly popular, and every singer's dream was to broadcast. That meant the BBC, and off Vera went for an audition with the BBC Dance Orchestra, led by Henry Hall.
They were looking for a girl singer, so I auditioned, and then they said, sorry, but your voice isn't suitable for broadcasting. I don't know how I was coming over or what, but anyway, I should have kept that letter, but I'm afraid it got lost.
Well, that concludes the program of dance music played to you by the BBC Dance Orchestra, directed by Henry Hall. Goodbye, everyone. Goodbye, and here's to the next time.
I always remembered one thing. When I was about 14, 15, I overheard somebody saying, "Oh, she'll never get anywhere, she's too common." And sometimes a remark like that can kill somebody's ambition completely. Or it can make you say, "What are you talking about? I'm not common. I can, you know." And that's how I felt. I went and had elocution lessons. I quite like when things go wrong. It's a challenge.
Luckily for Vera, Henry Hall wasn't the only one who wielded power. In Tin Pan Alley, an up-and-coming band leader heard Vera sing, Joe Loss.
The bad boy of the Stevens family. Clap.
He signed her up on the spot for 3 broadcasts on the BBC. You were starting to choose your songs, spot your songs,
yes,
find your songs?
I always chose my own songs. And even recording companies, you know, if they might suggest me to sing a certain song, I would try it. But if I didn't feel that it was me, I didn't sing it. The lyrics meant a lot to me. I had to feel comfortable with them.
In 1936, Vera featured unnamed on a cinema short with Joe Loss. This is the only surviving copy.
I never knew the thrill of life until I touched your lips. And just like a cigarette, love seemed to fade away and leave behind ashes of regret. And with a flip of your fingertips, it was easy for you to forget. Love is like a cigarette.
While band leaders may have been the stars, Vera was suddenly in demand. Dance band supremo Charlie Coons hired her for the glamorous West End Kazani Club.
Beneath the moon and under the sun.
Their performances were regularly broadcast live on the radio.
It's no matter, darling, where you are.
In 1937, Vera, who was now making a name for herself singing Tin Pan Alley's most popular songs, was approached by Bert Ambrose, the biggest band leader of all. He already had a regular girl singer, Evelyn Dall, an American girl different from Vera in every way.
Many people think that glamour girls, especially blonde bombshells, spend most of the time they're not on the stage in the hands of hairdressers, beauty experts, dress designers, and so on. Not Evelyn Dall. She may live in an expensive part of London's West End, but she finds plenty of chance for a bit of strenuous exercise at the bars. Yes, it takes a lot of energy being a blonde bombshell.
Go to town and get hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter. But until I feel that I can give it all I've got, I don't want to get hot.
I tried to be friendly with her, but she objected to me being with the band. I suppose I was a bit more popular than her because of the style of music I was singing. I was singing all the modern popular songs. And she was a jazzy girl, you know.
After the show, Vera used to get the bus straight home to her mum and dad in East Ham, while Evelyn went off to drink whiskey and play poker with the boys. She was also having an affair with Ambrose. After months of touring, the ill feeling between Evelyn and Vera came to a head, so Vera confronted Ambrose.
I said to him that I was leaving. He followed me to the side of the Wings on one concert and said, "Oh, you can't go. I'll double your salary." So I did stay on a bit longer.
Night and day.
Vera was broadcasting regularly with Ambrose and her voice was becoming well known.
Why is it
She'd been recording anonymously on the Crown label, but now they started using her name, and by the end of the 1930s, she'd sold over 1 million records. She was outselling Bing Crosby in the record shops, and on the variety circuits, she was becoming a bigger draw than Ambrose himself. At that point, there came a time when you were suddenly able to buy things. You treated yourself to a fur coat, was it?
Oh, yes, yes. My first mink.
Mink?
A mink. It was a mink, yes.
And you bought a car, didn't you?
Yes, an Austin 10. That took me everywhere, that little car.
Still only 22, Vera bought a 9-roomed house in Barking for around £1,000 and moved there with her parents. For the first time, the family had an indoor bathroom and toilet.
September the 3rd, 1939.
I have to tell you now, this country is at war with Germany.
What were your first thoughts, Vera, when war was declared?
I was sitting in the garden with Mum and Dad having a cup of tea, listening to the radio, and then war was declared. So I said, well, there goes my career. Just as I was beginning to get known a bit, I shall finish up in a factory.
All cinemas, theatres and other places of entertainment are to be closed immediately until further notice.
As it turned out, Vera's predictions for her future couldn't have been wider of the mark. In early 1940, a poll was conducted amongst the troops sent to France to find their favourite singer. To this day, you're known, one of the things you're known as is the Force's Sweetheart.
Yes, well, that title came from a newspaper competition. People to choose their favourite singer, and they chose me.
The war was to cement Vera Lynn in people's hearts and minds forever. By 1940, most of Europe was under the Nazi jackboot, and the Battle of Britain was raging in the air. People needed an escape from reality, and the demand for entertainment was greater than ever. The theatres came back to life, and in the same month that Germany started bombing London in earnest, Vera began a run in the show Apple Sauce.
I was at the Open Empire to start with, and then fortunately they moved the show to the Palladium. And while we were at the Palladium, the Open Empire got a direct hit. So it was just as well for me, otherwise I wouldn't be here talking to you now.
When the lights go on again, all over the world, and the boys are home again, all over the world, then we'll have time.
Sometimes you used to stay on and entertain the audience.
Well, I mean, the manager would come out and say the siren had gone, as if we didn't know we could hear it. But those who wished to leave could leave, but if you wanted, you could stay. And we used to have little concerts, you know, until the all clear. And I'd get in my little Austin tent with my tin hat by my side in case the raid started and I got caught, you know, shrapnel coming through the canvas roof of my car. Carry on, London.
When the lights go on again, all over.
Were you afraid? People always ask me that. I said no, because everyone was in the same boat. There were terrible things happening with the people, particularly in the East End. You just got to get on with everything and do your job, whatever it is. And I can say I never really felt afraid.
For all her success, Vera was still the girl from East Ham, as Florence Desmond, who was appearing in Applesauce with her, was quick to point out.
She was a very young, naive girl.
Desi guided me in an awful lot of things. First of all, she said, I think you need a new dress. I don't think you know...
You need a new one?
That's not suitable for you. So she took me to her dressmaker, and I know it took my whole year's coupons.
But it was... Vera, I can see you now. It was pink, and you had big shoulders.
Oh, yes, the
big
40s.
sleeve, and your tiny waist.
Oh,
they put a couple of forces here, I think.
Yeah,
they did.
This is the BBC programme for the forces. Good morning, everybody. Here is the first...
This was the first war where radio broadcasting played a major role, uniting the home front with the fighting front. Vera had suggested to the BBC that she do a 15-minute request programme for the boys abroad.
And I was called down to the stage door one day. Howard Thomas wanted to speak to me. So he said, well, we're going to do your programme, but not 15 minutes, as you suggested, but a half an hour. And we're going to call it Sincerely Yours, because we think you sing sincerely. So I said, right, that's lovely, fine, OK.
Wishing will make it so. Just keep on.
Sincerely Yours started broadcasting in the darkest days of the war in November 1941. This is the only recording still in existence.
To our men in uniform, from the girls at home, a personal letter in words and music, and the signature is
Sincerely yours, Vera Lynn. Dear boys, this letter of mine is getting to be a sort of rendezvous, where husbands and wives, torn apart by war, can be brought together by music. On the wings of these melodies, the sentiments go from me to both of you, from you to her.
The show immediately struck a chord with listeners, and Vera received over 2,000 requests a week from home and abroad.
If you are certain within your heart...
There was nothing like it on the radio, not with a single artist, and particularly doing messages and requests and connecting the people at home with those that were away. So it was quite a fresh idea, and entertainment was essential.
A few dozen sweethearts and wives have proudly sent me snaps of the man in their lives. I've seen enough of you boys to know that you like your pals to think you're a bit of a heartbreaker with the girls. But women aren't like that. Once they've met the man they want, no one else counts. If you're lucky, you've got a girl like that.
You actually went to hospitals where wives had had babies and so on.
Oh, yeah, that was a nice thing to do, because I could then tell some sergeant or somebody that's out there that I'd visited his wife in hospital, and that they were doing well, and took her some flowers.
And that's all my news and...
Each programme ended with a song that has come to define Vera.
Good night, boys. Sincerely yours, Vera Lynn.
We'll meet again, don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day.
Early in 1939 I was singing We'll Meet Again. And actually you think, well, now what am I going to close the programme on? It's got to be something. Oh, yes, I know. I've been singing a nice song in the theatres, in the variety theatres. We'll Meet Again. That's a nice... So that's when I chose We'll Meet Again as my fading out song on radio. And, of course, it's never left me.
We'll meet again, don't know where.
Vera Lynn's success didn't come without problems. There was a backlash against the programme, largely from some traditionalists within the BBC, some former members of the armed services, and some more conservative members of Parliament.
The Director General of the BBC asked how can men fit themselves for battle with these debilitating songs sounding in their ears. And Programme Review called the show flabby amusement and stated, "Sincerely yours, deplored, but popularity noted."
Too sentimental, making the boys homesick. And I said, that's rubbish, a lot of rubbish. I said, because the letters are so thankful for the programmes like that, taking news from home and having messages sent from one to the other.
There was a sort of anti-Lynn faction and a pro-Lynn faction, which was comprised of most of the general public, the listening public, most of the rank-and-file members of the armed services, and also most of the top brass of the armed services as well. They thought Vera Lynn was very good for morale indeed. And Vera Lynn's reaction to the anti-Slush campaign from the BBC is interesting. I think it reveals one of the reasons why she's remained so popular is her tenacity. She never let it get her down. She didn't change track. She knew what she was good at. She knew what the people wanted, and she stuck to her guns.
Have time for things like wedding rings and free hearts will sing.
Cinema newsreels soon picked up on the trend that Vera had started for using a public medium to send personal messages.
Hello, Mother. It's great to get a chance like this to speak to the folks at home. As you can see, I'm fit and well. God bless you all. Chins up. Keep smiling.
The choice of Fade Out song came as no surprise. And it was to the cinema that Vera herself was now invited to make the first of 3 films for Columbia Pictures.
Time for young gentlemen to...
The films used Vera's own life as the basis for their stories.
May I?
I enjoyed it, but it was very difficult for me to be anybody else but who I was. I was so established as Vera Lynn, you know, that to put on a different character.
Stop the rehearsal. It's terrible. Worst I've ever heard.
All right, what's wrong?
Everything. It won't do its out.
The films I made were really in my own character, doing what I did, sing.
Oh, leave her alone. She's not tired. She's lazy.
I am too tired. Why shouldn't I be? We all are. Rehearsing 4 hours without a break. It's too much. It's all very well for you sitting there watching us work. You don't have to do anything. But we have to go on the air and broadcast. It would serve you right if your old program didn't go on the air at all.
Oh, the way it sounds, it might be a good thing.
The film so closely mirrored Vera's own life that in one of them, playing himself a member of the RAF Squadronaires, was Harry Lewis, Vera's husband, whom she'd met at the outbreak of war through Bert Ambrose.
He came in to join the band for a tour, which unfortunately had to break up when war started.
So do you remember that moment, Harry? Was it love at first sight?
Well, I think I could say yes, because I saw her there and I thought, oh, that's just my style. And when we left there, I said, well, where are you going? And she said, I'm going to Denmark Street. So I said, come on, we'll get a cab. A taxi? I'm not going in a taxi with you. I'm going to get on the bus. So we got on the bus and we went upstairs on the bus, right? And I went to pay her fare. Don't want to know. Don't pay my fare. I don't want to get compromised. You know?
Compromised for Tums. Were you really frightened of him?
No, it wasn't that, but I mean, I'd only just met him, you know, and I don't allow strange men to pay my fare on the bus, so I got out my 2 pennies and I paid my own fare.
Yours till the stars lose their...
Vera and Harry married in August 1941. The marriage lasted until Harry's death 57 years later. By 1942, Vera was well and truly topping the bill. These years were so successful for her that decades later, a comic was to joke that the Second World War had been started by Vera Lynn's agent. Meanwhile, she felt there was more that she could be doing for the war effort, so she signed up with the Entertainment National Services Association.
I phoned ENSA and said I wanted to go and do some entertaining overseas. So they said, well, where do you want to go? I said, well, if I'm going in, I know Europe are getting well supplied. I want to go somewhere where there isn't any entertainment. So they said, well, Burma's the only place, you know. So I said, right, that's where I want to go. I want to go where they badly need it.
In March of 1944, Vera set off on a 22,000-mile journey in a military transport plane, bypassing occupied France and neutral Spain. She flew first to Gibraltar. Also on board were her accompanist, Len Edwards, and a small upright piano. They stopped in Cairo, where she gave several concerts in the desert, travelling on to Iraq and Dubai for further performances. Several weeks after leaving England, she arrived in Bombay, where she sang to thousands of soldiers, and then on to Calcutta, before finally arriving on the Burmese border to meet General Slim's forgotten army.
The Allies have been called upon to repulse another big Japanese gamble, this time an attack against Impal.
It was late April, and Vera's arrival coincided with a major Japanese offensive.
The main fighting has been along the roads.
I was told I wasn't allowed to take a diary, just in case I was captured by the Japanese. But I did. I took my little diary, my little pencil, and just about see it, tiny little writing. Slept on stretcher, oh yes, balanced on 2 kitchen chairs. A rotten night, I should think so.
She travelled hundreds of miles down the Arakan Road, close to the front line, performing all along the way.
Terrible journey to Dag Sahari rest camp. First show to 4,000 boys. Terrific crowd. Police, well, needed.
Tomorrow is a lovely day.
She and Len journeyed back and forth through Burma, dragging their small piano behind them, through terrain so rough it almost fell apart.
We continue on to the front. The road is impossible.
The second part of her journey took her to Dimapur, only a few miles from Kohima, where the battle, which was to prove the turning point of the war in Burma, was at its height.
Just forget your troubles.
2 shows, boys from the front, to bed, worn out.
A lot of hardship.
Oh, yes, but it was a wonderful experience. I mean, it's the highlight of my career, really. But my strongest memories of Burma was going round the hospital tents, holding their hands, you know. They didn't always want me to sing to them, just to sit there and talk to them and reassure them that everything was all right at home. When you're visiting the boys, these sick boys, and it was what with the heat and the smell and everything, you know, I asked for a glass of water and said, sorry, we haven't got any. Someone said to me once that, well, you being here, home doesn't seem so far away.
At the time, it was reported that Vera had packed numerous ball gowns. In fact, she took only one, the same pink dress that had cost her a year's coupons back in 1941. Tell me about that pink dress. The pink dress that you picked especially for the boys in Burma.
Well, it was a very pretty dress I had for the stage. I thought, well, I'll take one dress with me. I knew I was going to be in khaki most of the time. Anything, only wore it once. It was so hot and I was perspiring and the boys were laughing and I couldn't understand what they were laughing at. And they were watching the perspiration gradually spreading across my body, you know. They thought it was very funny. My dress was two colours, pink and black.
I think Vera Lynn is quintessentially the sort of English Rose, if you like. She was a singer, but she wasn't particularly glamorous. She was attractive, and yet she wasn't particularly sexy, I suppose is the word that we'd use today. I think her great appeal, particularly for men in the armed forces, was that she was down to earth, ordinary, and she was sincere. She really believed in what she was singing, and people felt that she meant what she was singing. I think she represented, for the men out on the front, the kind of girl that they would like to have waiting for them back home.
By the war's end, Vera was firmly and forever etched in the nation's memory as the force's sweetheart.
We may allow ourselves a brief period of rejoicing. Today is Victory in Europe's Day.
It was, she thought, the end of an era, and she had more than played her part. She and Harry bought a big house and farm and retired to Sussex to try their hand at the good life.
Hi, Mummy. Ah, here she is. Quite close at hand, after all. By the way, folks, let me introduce you. I'm Miss Lewis, and Mummy, of course, is Mrs. Lewis. But you'll know her better as Sincerely Yours, Vera Lynn. And that's Daddy. He's Mr. Lewis, the market gardener. Well, folks, we're off.
After a couple of years of self-imposed exile, Vera resumed her singing career with Harry as her manager and baby Virginia by her side. But a return to BBC Radio in the late 40s was to be short-lived. They wanted her to change her style and sing bright, happy songs, suitable for a victorious Britain. Vera was having none of it.
She knew what kind of things she could sing, how she could portray herself, how she wanted to portray herself. If they didn't want it, well, then tough, she'd go off and be herself somewhere else.
My love for you is as wide as the ocean.
Little heels get dug in and that's it, you know. And we can be very obstinate at times if we want to. And so, yes, if we want to do something, then we just jolly well do it.
Is a tide of emotion as ever flowing as time evermore.
No notes lower than that. No, that's low.
Radio Luxembourg promptly engaged Vera, and other opportunities soon followed.
I was getting invitations to go to Holland, Norway, Denmark, Sweden. During the war, they used to listen to me secretly. In fact, if they were found listening, they were shot. I had a funny letter once from a Dutch man. They used to listen to my BBC programme in the hayrick. It naturally had no power. And they rigged up a system where this man could ride a bicycle and keep the dynamo going, pedalling like mad to keep the power going so they could hear the programme.
I'll wait for you. Auf Wiedersehen.
There were bigger continents to conquer, and a meeting with American star Tallulah Bankhead led to an invitation to the United States. Vera took a brand new song with her.
Auf Wiedersehen. We'll meet again.
I'd been to Switzerland for a couple of weeks, and in the beer gardens that they had over there, I heard this woman and getting everybody to sing Auf Wiedersehen, Auf Wiedersehen. I thought, oh, that's a catchy tune. And went somewhere else and got it, and everyone was singing this song. So I thought, that's got to be a hit, you know. So I came back home and went round the music publishers to find out if they knew of the song Auf Wiedersehen. And they found it. They said, well, it's a great tune, but, you know, that there's no English lyrics to it. So I said, well, get some, because I think it's a hit.
In 1951, Vera became the first British artist to have a #1 hit in America with this song. It was a big hit in Britain, too. Turning down the offer to stay and work in America, Vera returned to London and the Adelphi Theatre. Vera, the first time I went to London to go to the theatre, what show was it?
London Laughs or something?
Yes. London Laughs, with you starring
Tony Hancock.
Tony Hancock and Jimmy Edwards.
And Jimmy Edwards.
Vera's chart success ensured that the comedy revue London Laughs was a sellout success. The show ran for 2 years. Even if the BBC wasn't interested in her, the public were. When commercial television started in 1955, she was hired almost at once for a series of programmes.
Hello, everyone.
And Vera, always able to move with the times, while remaining reassuringly the same, embraced this latest opportunity.
I used to walk
In the shade,
with my blues
on parade,
Now I'm
not afraid.
No sooner had she appeared on ITV than the BBC welcomed her back on both television and radio.
You must remember this. A kiss is still a kiss. A sigh.
Now living in a big house in Finchley, her daughter Virginia's childhood was far removed from Vera's own.
Fundamental things apply as time goes by.
Well, I think the 50s were the best years. It was just after the war. It was like a tree beginning to re-bloom. Buds were coming out again and coming back to life. Let's all make a go of it. And that's how I feel the 50s was. There wasn't the hassle there is today. Wasn't so much traffic on the roads. And although we were just recovering from rationing, we were quite happy with what we got. I think it was a good time, the 50s.
Never out of date.
Vera was living the dream, and women's magazines held her way of life up to the public as an example of how to have it all, 50s style.
I think she's a symbol of working class aspirations in the post-war period. She becomes associated with the better lives, the nicer homes, the more secure family lives, because let's not forget, it's only really after the Second World War that the family, for the majority of people in Britain, becomes happy experience once they've got full employment and growing prosperity.
Goes by.
Dawn on the greatest day the airport ever knew. Great to be alive. To be young and a Beatle fan, just heaven.
By the early 60s, the music world had changed. Elvis Presley, Cliff Richard, the Beatles.
Never mind crush barriers, the Beatles fans would smash the sound barrier.
You're not getting a bit too,
Me getting square? But you're not exactly a soul sister, are you, Vera? Wouldn't call you the queen of the discotheques now, would we? I think, luckily for us, there are a lot of squares watching at home, and maybe in the audience they'd like a corny old song they can sing along with, you know, pub songs.
Vera realised that while she may be out of fashion in Britain, she'd always have an audience elsewhere, and this time the invitations came from Australia, New Zealand and South Africa. But by the end of the 60s, she was back on British television with her own show, given to her by the son of the man who once fired her.
He had BBC Two, and I thought that this was a perfect kind of network on which to do a definitive Vera Lynn series. And so I paraded my best music producer at the time. He was a fellow called Stuart Morris, and he looked at me and said, "Vera Lynn? Why? What have I done wrong?"
There's a kind of hush all over the world tonight, all over the world.
My landlady used to get tickets for TV shows, and I thought, well, you know, Vera Lynn, well, I've got the ticket, I might as well go. Bit old hat, really. I was completely blown away. This is 1969, so Vera would have been in her early 50s already. I remember being absolutely stunned by the power of the voice. It's wonderful, I can see her now. It was just jaw-droppingly powerful.
Closer now, and you will see what I mean. It isn't a dream.
And it was the first time I'd ever seen CSO, because she was doing it in front of this bright blue backdrop, and I thought, that's weird. And there were monitors hanging from the ceiling, and I could see that it wasn't bright blue at all. There were clouds everywhere and things like that. And I remember the young generation were dancing all behind her.
I did a Vera Lynn series, and she was singing some big ballad at the end of the show. And her diction and her voice is so pure, and I mean, it just moved me. And I'm afraid I'm a bit of a wet fish when it comes to perfection, and she was perfection. And I had tears in my eyes. And Stuart Morris, the producer, turned around and the controller said, "What's the matter with you? What's happened?" And I said, "It's just her. She's so wonderful."
When I was born to be just your.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to introduce you to Miss Vera Lynn.
Vera was well and truly back, a firmly established television star.
How are you?
Hello.
Sorry about it. It's a ring. I can't get it off. I'm sorry.
Excuse me, Justin.
I bet shut. Hey?
Listen.
You're going to come over because I'm going to say a line.
Oh, are you?
I was going to say.
I was going to.
Hey? I was going to. No, it's all in it.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I bet that shook the chalk off the White Cliffs of Dover.
Oh.
I was going to say that, but I won't now.
30 years after the end of the Second World War, Vera was recognised in the Queen's birthday honours and made a Dame of the British Empire.
I should like to pay my tribute to Dame Vera, not as a fellow performer or as a politician, but as an ex-serviceman. Here is an old soldier's ode to Dame Vera. Let us all sing in praise of Dame Vera, to whom at last justice is done, who ne'er to our hearts has been dearer since the war against Hitler was won. She sang of the White Cliffs of Dover. She told us that we'd meet again. We'd be up to our armpits in clover. And goodbye just meant auf Wiedersehen. And when in due course the war finished, I'll swear with my very last breath, the Nazis weren't by Churchill diminished. 'Twas our Vera who sang 'em to death.
Wishing will make it so.
Over the next few years, Vera began, as she put it, to phase her way out. Although she performed less and less often, she could always be relied upon to sing at military reunions and Remembrance Day celebrations.
I'm proud of her. I'm glad that I'm her brother, and I'm glad she's my sister. But if she never sang a note the feeling would be just the same.
And now, someone who was born during the war, Cliff Richard, OBE.
In 1995, crowds assembled outside Buckingham Palace to mark the 50th anniversary of the war's end.
And finally, then the force's sweetheart, in fact, everybody's sweetheart, Dame Vera Lynn.
Bless them all, bless them all, the long and the short and the tall.
This was Vera's last public performance. She was 78.
I did ask her if she warmed up. She said, warmed up, dear? What do you mean? I said, well, I do little exercise. Oh, no, darling, she said, I just open my mouth and I sing. So there were all sorts of things going for her. She had a very special voice, I think, too, a very pure kind of voice, very clean voice, but she made a sound that touched everyone's hearts.
I'll never forget the people.
On that particular occasion, I remember meeting Queen Mother, and I happened to say, well, of course, to the Queen Mother, I said, you know that these songs that we've all been singing, you probably know these much better than us. And she said, oh, my dear, we've been practicing for a month.
For all her enduring success over the decades, Vera Lynn is still most closely associated with the war years. You look forward to the next few years, don't you, in this funny old world?
Well, yes, I do. I hope I've got a few more years. And I hope to make the most of it. I don't perform anymore now, but I'm grateful that I've got a name that I can help other people. What have we got here?
Got a singer over here.
Vera has recruited New Zealand singer Hayley Westenra onto the board of one of her charities.
Bye, guys. Bye.
In the recent conflicts in the Middle East, Hayley has emerged as the most recent forces sweetheart.
Yeah, I really enjoy going out to Iraq.
And probably the conditions are a little different. I was living in a grass hut when I was out there. With buckets, you know, no sanitation, no running water.
They have concrete bunkers that you sleep in. You don't really bother with much makeup either as well.
Oh, you couldn't. It's impossible. Lipstick. Just a bit of lipstick.
Yeah, exactly.
When you're young, like you are, and I was at the time, you can get away with that.
Yeah.
We'll meet again. Don't know where, don't know when, but I know we'll meet again some sunny day.
Hayley Westenra sang at the Festival of Remembrance 70 years after the outbreak of war, and Vera Lynn's first recording of this song. A song which has echoed down the years and united all those whose lives have been affected by armed conflict.
And I will just say hello to the folks that you know. Tell them it won't be long.
This little girl from East Ham would never have had the opportunity if she hadn't have been singing, if my mother hadn't put me on the stage.
There'll be bluebirds
and a sea.